Hi, and welcome to Good Food Unearthed. We're going to continue with the COVID 19 Investigating the Truth series. And this is going to be part two, what is really going on and what we can do. So we're going to get started. Okay. And as always, we're going to start with a wonderful song from Kid Waste called Free. That's a great song that I'm adopting for a theme song for this webinar series with lyrics just to keep in mind. And we're going to start. Okay, so we're going to start with how the narrative is being manipulated intentionally. And I'm not just saying this because I want to say this. There's evidence for this, and there's a reason for this. It was actually designed to be this way. So, this is a public health strategy. And part of that public health strategy includes using fear tactics to promote compliance. It would be important to ask yourself why Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and mainstream media are censoring any other opinion regarding what is causing the illness that is being seen, what possible treatment options exist, and what the scientific studies say. Ask yourself why websites are being removed, online sources are being shadow banned, and certain search results are being buried. And ask yourself why there is so much aggression, shutting down, and ignoring of any dissenting information. I'm reminded of a quote that I forget where it comes from, but basically, the measure of a wise person is that they can entertain ideas that go against what they believe to be true without shutting them down. They can listen to them openly and come to their own conclusions. And I believe that people are smart enough to be able to decide for themselves what information is helpful for them and what is not. And I believe that we should all be given that choice, that fully informed consent in deciding in what we want to do. So, this censorship was reported on in healthaffairs.org early on, talking about as the COVID 19 outbreak unfolds, social media companies were taking additional steps to curb what they called misinformation. So, while many of the mechanisms established during the measles outbreak remain in place, several companies monitoring misinformation are looking beyond the field of vaccines and monitoring all types of coronavirus related misinformation. Facebook announced in early February that it would remove all posts furthering, quote, false claims or, quote, conspiracy theories. Pinterest and TikTok maintain a similar policy, and Twitter suspended an account which was used to promote coronavirus conspiracy theories. Several websites now have fact checking features embedded into their operation. And a question to ask would be who are these people who are deciding what is misinformation or conspiracy theory? And who are the fact checkers? And who's fact checking the fact checkers? And that's important to investigate. And if you are following any of those fact checking sources, I would encourage you to investigate those sources yourself and see if they are valid. Now, John Hopkins had an event on October 18th, 2019 called Event 201, and it was a training exercise for a potential coronavirus outbreak. And as part of their agenda, they listed that governments and the private sector should assign a greater priority to developing methods to combat mis and disinformation prior to the next pandemic response. And this included requiring the requiring developing the ability to flood the media with fast, accurate, consistent information in an attempt to bury any dissenting views from the narrative that they wanted to put forward. So they would flood the media, and this included the 24/7 reporting on COVID 19 commercials, COVID 19 updates, COVID 19 on the radio, on the television, on social media, everywhere. Public health authorities were told to work with private employers and trusted community leaders, such as faith leaders, to promulgate the factual information to employees and citizens. Now, this is important because, as I mentioned in part one, Truth is something that is in essence and it is not bound by form, but many people put their faith and trust in individuals who have maybe gained a reputation of being trustworthy, or maybe never gained that reputation, but hold a title that in our minds gives the assumption of trustworthiness. And these individuals can influence greatly many people who just blindly take them on their word. And that is why you only need to work with a few people to get them to spread the message to affect a mass population. This was to augment public messaging, manage rumors and misinformation, and amplify what they deemed as credible information. So this is part of the plan. The censorship is very real, and it is recommended to do this. Now, in Ohio, they have a landmark lawsuit. Ohio Stands Up is part of a landmark lawsuit with lawyer Tom Renz, challenging the emergency designation. And as part of that, you can access their 627 pages of supporting documents from experts that challenge that emergency status, including the evidence from Dr. Peter Bregan, who addresses the role of the media and the the uh, the pushing of fear, the fear mongering, and why that's being done. Now, he himself talks about how I mentioned in part one that there are no scientific authorities. Okay, there is a body of research and opinion, always conflicted, forever evolving, with innumerable individuals searching for and comparing their visions of empirical truth. The idea of scientific authority is a fiction created by media analysts and politicians seeking seemingly superior experts to bolster their preconceived biases and opinions. The infliction of fear and pain is something called negative reinforcement, and it's been used in animal psychology experiments, and also it's been used with children in experiments. So the question is, why are many of our leaders trying to scare us? And it's because they know the missing ingredient. According to a study, after scaring us, our leaders must provide us with instruction on how to successfully implement the recommended actions, as well as convincing people that they are personally susceptible to the threat. So they are always in a state of fear. Now, this is important, and we'll get into why. But this is laying out how the public health methods are creating sufficient fear and anxiety to convince people of the necessity of surrendering their liberty. They maintain an atmosphere of fear. They began with early predictions of millions of deaths in America, warned that shutdowns were incomplete and would make the epidemic worse. And then the constant messaging, remember the flooding of information, constant repetition, repetition, repetition. This is something that helps with subconsciously reaching the mind control mechanisms. You may not even be aware that these messages, the constant repetition, become part of your thought structure, and you adopt them as your own when they were actually introduced to you. So they broadcast this constant information and they spread news of extreme examples of COVID 19 disease and deaths. And this is to create fear so that if it's a child or a young adult or somebody in their 40s, they want everybody to feel like it can affect them directly, that nobody is safe from this, and they're going to suppress any critical or contradictory information that might alleviate fear of the virus. When you're afraid of the truth, you try to suppress opposing information. But when you are speaking truth, the truth is not fragile. So you do not try to suppress any critical or contradictory information because the truth can defend itself. It can stand up to any of those critiques or contradictory information if those are not correct. So, again, stirring up the feeling of emergency, broadcasting that there's no treatment for the early stages, um, constantly emphasizing the seriousness and dangers of the virus, making people acquiesce one step at a time. So, this is a little tiptoe of you say yes to this, and then we'll take more, and then we'll take more. So, stay at home for a few weeks, then became a few months, and then can become indefinite home confinement. So, also for small businesses and for personal care establishments, they create such onerous requirements for service that these places are forced to go out of business rather than reopen. They also canceled any elective medical procedures, many of which were needed to alleviate pain and improve a person's general health and well being. And this included a lot of dentists who were told to not work and people who had infected tooths that could not be removed during that time period of closing down. They included animals in this. Keep your dogs 6 feet apart too. Keep your children 6 feet apart from each other. Do not allow play dates or contact outside the family. Forbid contact with other family members sheltering separately. Forbid contact with friends. All of this forbidding of gathering forbids people from seeing what's really going on with the people who are around them, forbids them from conversing with people, forbids them from using their own experience, their own observation to decide for themselves what makes sense to them. People are abdicating their self authority by following these orders. And then they're creating bizarre and isolating requirements for establishments to reopen, like plexiglass partitions and so on. And that also makes it difficult for some small businesses to reopen. Now, here was one study from June 11th, 2020, on how fear appeal approaches in COVID 19 health communication may be harming the global community. And it stated in our work with health professionals, an example of a proposed COVID 19 campaign was to design a poster featuring an image of mass burials to persuade individuals to wash their hands. And another proposed health communication campaign among healthcare professionals was to create television commercials portraying a fictional hospital overloaded with patients coughing up blood, fainting in hallways, and crying in pain. Now, I believe that it was one of the more popular news stations in the US that was caught fabricating a video of people lining up for COVID 19 testing, and it was actually a false story. And it's been revealed that the video that came out from China of people falling in the streets and hospitals that were overwhelmed, that was false as well. So when we see something, when it appears to us on the screen, it's important, it would behoove us to step back and take a breath and just think for a minute and come back into ourselves and think, is this true? And you can investigate, you can choose to investigate it, and you can find out for yourself what is the best action to take. And if you don't know whether it's true or not, you can then, of course, look at part one, the science, and see what's the best action to take. Because when you understand those foundations, you cannot be manipulated through fear. Fear is an excellent control mechanism. It puts a person into fight or flight mode, which makes them too agitated to think clearly. When we're in this state, we can develop blind faith in any person who will present him or herself as someone with the answers. We have been trained not to trust ourselves and to rely on experts or even to rely on computer models. We're taught that human beings are fallible, but artificial intelligence or computer models would not make the same mistakes that we would. Although we forget that human beings are the people who program those computer models. And when we put somebody in charge of making the decisions of our life, we are again abdicating the authority over ourselves. We've been pre programmed for this via the media, via the school systems, and death itself has been separated and transformed into a boogeyman, something to be sad of, something to avoid, something to be frightened of. And we're trained to fight aging and prolong life. But the question is, to what end? Because in reality, we are essentially dying and being reborn constantly. This is a quote from Dr. Michael Greger. Each year you are reborn. You create and destroy nearly your entire body weight in new cells every year. Every day, about 50 billion of your cells die, and about 50 billion new cells are born to keep you in balance. Life and death go hand in hand. It is basically the creation into form and the decomposition into um, dissolving that form, going back and being regenerated into another form of matter. So, this is always happening within us, around us. It's just that we have become unconscious of this. So, what is really happening with this fear that's being created? It's distracting us from the fact that this COVID 19 is being used as the impetus to roll out the final stages of what many people are now using the language of the new normal. And here's a quote that I'd like to get you to embody. Don't ignore what they show you. No matter how much you wish it weren't so, it is. Stop arguing with reality. They are what their behavior reveals them to be. Respond and move forward accordingly. Many people can adopt beautiful language and they can show you in videos what they want you to see. But there is documentary evidence to look at the actual actions that have been taken and what has actually been playing out during the lockdowns when COVID 19, this pandemic, has supposedly been going around the world. What has really been happening on the ground? And that's what we need to pay attention to. Many people think that the one world government is a conspiracy theory, but creating an opportunity to implement desired changes globally, this is not something new. The changes rolling out now, they were scheduled to occur. A global pandemic is being used as the impetus to push these things ahead, and we're going to go into what they are. Dr. Peter Bregan also mentions that a global catastrophe is required to demand the need for an increase in top down administration around the world. This is a classic problem reaction solution, and we'll get into that a bit more. And if a sufficient global catastrophe is not readily available, then global opportunists must create one, preferably not out of nothing, but out of the next threat that is seen emerging. And we're going to see how the groundwork has been laid to bring about the bioterror paradigm. When you look at the lockdown measures that are coming out, there is no logic to them if you think about the science, if you know the actual science. There's absolutely no logic. But there is logic to what is happening once you find out what the plan is. And you can because it's documented. You just need to know where to look and you need to know to ask the question. And all of these things on this page here, the World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you can look into all of them, and they're very overt about their plans and what they want to roll out. Now, they may not all be connected, but there is a goal for a global one world government. And you'll understand why as we go through this. Now, what's often referred to as the New World Order, and please just don't dismiss this, it is a collaboration between supranational political organizations like the United Nations and the European Union, controlled scientific authorities such as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the World Health Organization, global financial institutions including the World Bank, IMF, ECB, and Bank for International Settlements, globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum, NGOs like the World Wildlife Fund, and policy-making think tanks such as the Council on Foreign Relations, the Club of Rome, and the Trilateral Commission. Now, if you've never looked into any of these, I would recommend that before dismissing this information outright, you do investigate these organizations and look at what their actions show, what picture that paints for you. Because, yes, it's lovely language, such as the World Wildlife Fund, but look into who founded it and what is the history and background of that, and what is its actual function instead of the assumed function. And this is when you start to see what's really playing out. So now we're going to have a look at the New World Order and how that language itself is not conspiracy, but it's something that has been talked about for quite a long time.
I have in my possession a secret map made in Germany by Hitler's government, by the planners of the New World Order.
And the hope that each of us has to build a new world order.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge, a new era. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
The President George Bush has talked time and time again about a new world order. And this is the best chance to begin to establish the new world order.
And after 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
As I've told you before, because I love it so much, they also created the Great Seal of the United States. And that Great Seal of the United States has on it, Novus Order Seclorum, a new order for the centuries, for the ages, forever.
Now, much has been said by the Secretary of State and others about a new world order, about a defining moment in history. What kind of new world order we really create?
With the end of the Cold War, Henry Kissinger pointed out in his superb book on diplomacy, he said, "None of the most important countries which must build a new world order have had any experience with the multi-state system that is emerging. Never before has a new world order had to be assembled from so many different perceptions or on so global a scale."
When really a new world order can be created, it's a great opportunity. It isn't just a crisis. There's a need for a new world order.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
There is a chance for the President of the United States to use this disaster to carry out what his father, a phrase his father used, I think, only once, and hasn't been used since, and that is a new world order.
And then President Bush, at the end of that war, promised he would give 4 graduation addresses, 4 commencement addresses, describing that new world order and what America's role was going to be in it.
We've got to give them a stake in creating the kind of world order that I think all of us would like to see.
I think even that does not describe why the world has changed so much and why the world has turned so much toward a new world order and a new kind of civilization.
But the point here is, it's not about me, it's about the idea of freedom. It's about the future of the whole region. It's about the future of Europe and a new world order.
The transatlantic partnership was never just the foundation of our security. Out of it came a new Europe, a new world order. The pieces are in flux. Soon they will settle again. Before they do, let us reorder this world around us.
I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation. We have resolved that from today we will together manage the process of globalization. It's what I believe is our destiny of success in this new world order. It is a new world order with significantly different and radically new challenges for the future. India and China are clearly becoming part of our new order.
World order is about a balance of power, but it's also about commonly accepted rules about what ought to be the operating system of the world, how ought it to be set and changed.
The Concert of Europe, quote, had a deeply conservative sense of mission. Based on respect for king and hierarchy, it prioritized order over equality, stability over justice. In your view, are those still the world's priorities?
I think they need to be. We need to think about order very differently in the 21st century. That if you live in a world of globalization, to make a long story short, nothing stays local for long. If you're India and you decide that your economy forces you to generate a lot more electricity, and the easiest way to do it is through coal, this will have climate change consequences for everyone else. And what we want to do is set up these rules through consultations and negotiations. Here's what every sovereign entity, including the United States, is obligated to do. And we'd agree to the set of behaviors and rules or norms. And then we'd also agree, how do we incentivize countries to live up to it? How do we give them capacity, if they lack it, to live up to it? How do we penalize or deal with those who violate it?
And this present window of opportunity, during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built.
This would be the time, because you really need to bring China into the creation of a new world order, financial world order. Recapitalize the banks, and then work on a better world order, where we work together to resolve problems that confront humanity, like global warming.
But it is the awareness itself that will drive the change. And one of the ways it will drive the change is through global governance and global agreements.
It's past the point of talking. We know historically that the global governance the sort of agenda to these issues is very hard to try and is with all the best intentions, it's very hard to actually activate.
The European countries are binding together slowly, forming the EU. Eventually we will see the rise of a single world government.
2009 is also the first year of global governance, with the establishment of the G20 in the middle of the financial crisis. The climate conference in Copenhagen is another step towards the global management of our planet.
Today Europe can propose the principles and rules that will shape a new global order.
Le moment où tout le monde aura compris qu'il était temps de changer, temps de donner un nouveau visage à la mondialisation, temps de construire un nouvel ordre mondial politique, économique, social, assis sur de nouveaux principes et de nouvelles règles. Au nom de l'Europe, en tant que président de l'Union européenne, j'ai proposé que se tienne d'ici à la fin de l'année un sommet mondial pour que soient discutés et décidés ces nouveaux principes, ces nouvelles règles.
On a world level, I think it's absolutely necessary that we go in the direction of a network of regional organizations. We have the European Union in Europe. Maybe tomorrow in Asia they shall create an Asian currency unit, like we have the Economic and Monetary Union in Europe. There is certainly also an enormous intense cooperation more and more in Latin America. There are the Arab countries. So I see a world order in the future with a multipolar world order.
We can build the 21st century world order.
The nature of the security threats we all face is completely different today from even a few years ago. Proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, new arms races, terrorist fighters, but also the impact of climate change. These are all security issues, probably the most pressing ones of our times, because we can be somehow, and maybe more than others, a security provider at large. Today, I believe Europe knows that military means are sometimes necessary, and there is no ambiguity about that. We know that. And this is why we have, in the last 2 years, built at last the European defence. A dream that our founding fathers and mothers always dreamt of, but never managed to accomplish. And now it's done. We have united as European Union the second largest defence budget in the world. Together, joining forces, we are definitely a superpower, economically and also in security terms. The Europe of Defence is now a reality with solid foundations, and this is our contribution, the European Union contribution to the security of our citizens, first and foremost, but also it is our commitment to a more cooperative, multilateral New World Order. It is our commitment to a more cooperative New World Order. Our commitment to a New World Order.
Okay, so whatever you'd like to take away from that is completely up to you. But the point is that language, the New World Order, global governance, that has been around for a while, and it has been a goal for some people who are involved in deciding what happens in global governance. Some people who are at the helm of control in certain areas in politics and economics, and so on. So the UN itself has come out with this, and they hosted a virtual concert not that long ago in the battle against COVID-19. And what's really interesting are the lyrics, and this is from their website, so you can look it up yourself. And this was before the stricter lockdowns started occurring, when we had things opening up early in the summer. And now they're singing about how around the world we're closing borders, COVID-19 on the rise. So this was predicted to happen on schedule. And then they say that how a new world order behind closed doors, the storm will pass, we will survive, we will rise again. So they do have an acknowledgement there of a new world order behind closed doors, which personally I find is an odd thing to have in a song. But there you have it. That's something to consider, a piece of information to think about. Now, what is this new world order comprised of? And we're going to break this down throughout this presentation. We're going to look at technocracy, the fourth industrial revolution, human 2.0, smart cities, sustainable development goals, Agenda 21, 2030, the Great Reset, what those actually are, the digital dollar and social credit system, and what that total control is going to look like, how the groundwork is being really fast tracked at this point because they've laid so much groundwork already over the previous decades. So even mainstream historians like Mark Mazauer has written about this, Governing the World, the History of an Idea, 1815 to the Present. Mark Mazauer specializes in modern Greece, 20th century Europe, and international history. He read classics and philosophy at Oxford, studied international affairs at Johns Hopkins University's Bologna Center, and has a doctorate in modern history from Oxford. So just a quote from the description of this book. It looks at the birth of the League of Nations and the United Nations in the 20th century to the dominance of global finance at the turn of the millennium. So that is a key player, and explores the current era of international life as Western dominance wanes and a new global balance of power emerges. In here, as was mentioned by one of the members of the Council of Foreign Relations in an interview in that video we just watched, they talk about the concert of Europe that was around prior to World War I, and some of what was going on during that time, ideas for the ruling of governed places, and how, as we became more global, there's been a shift of these people who desire control over aspects of life, desire of control over resources, to having a more global grip on things. And that's understandable. If you're in that position, just imagine that yourself. If you have control of resources, and you will want to, as things become more global, expand that control. You don't really want to let it go. So there might be, you might not be the person who's like that, but you can understand how somebody else may be. And we have historical examples of that that's easy to find. So, what is technocracy? Well, technocracy, as defined in the Technocrat magazine from 1939, it's the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. Now, original technocrats viewed people as nothing more than resources on the same level as animals and natural resources on the planet. Now, technocrats could just be another name for people who view themselves as a superior species, a superior race, and they view the masses of humanity as less than they are, the same way that you might view animals if you're so inclined that way. Many people see animals as inferior instead of just different. So that is what's going on. And their goal was, and still is, to apply quote unquote science to the efficient balancing of resources by controlling production of goods and services as well as their consumption. The objects of this social engineering would have no more control over their own lives than the cattle in the feedlot. Now, if you've studied history, then you'll recognize that this has happened before. And before World War II occurred, and before World War I even, you had that concert of Europe, and you had the Austro-German Empire in that area of Europe, and very well educated people. Now, how can you convince so many people to go along with such atrocities, to go along with war, to go along with concentration camps? And what you can do is set up a rational solution and make people think that that is the way to go, that this is what we must do, and it's scientifically proven, and we have all the evidence behind us, and you just need to trust us and follow along, and we will do this. And at the same time, you induce fear, and that fear mechanism stops people from taking a minute to step back and think and decide what's right for themselves. So, this technocratic system was outlined in 1974 by former U.S. Ambassador Richard N. Gardner, a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, in his article, The Hard Road to World Order. And in that, he talks about how one of the things that is needed is an end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, which will accomplish much more than the old fashioned frontal assault, which is war. So, this is a key part to remember. They cannot have nations, different nations like Canada and the US and China, if there's going to be a top governing body. They cannot have those nations. So, they need to erode national sovereignty piece by piece. And you can see how some of what's happening through playing out the pandemic and the lockdowns and people's faith in their governments, how that is eroding very quickly. And with the elections in the US, that's another factor that's involved. Now, this is something everybody should be aware of because we all think that we can't be taken in, and that we'll recognize a con as soon as it's in front of us. But that's not actually the case because con men are very well versed in human psychology, and they know how to go about under the radar. And what they can do is they create problems or even just the perception of a problem, and they control that perception very well. They can use predictive programming, and that will give them reliable reactions from the people that they're trying to con. And as they do that, they offer up their plan dressed up as the best solution. But what will actually happen is they will get the people themselves to demand the solution that the con man wants to present them. And that's what the predictive programming does. It's very clever. They can utilize language, charisma, people's innate better natures, and the promise of easing their fears. One of the key factors of this is that it disempowers individuals. People are victims and they themselves can do nothing. It's a big problem out there. Only people with a lot of influence can do anything. This is what we have to do, and we all need to jump on board with it collectively. So, the con man's plan alone, which is conceived, of course, by experts, is the answer or solution. And people themselves will believe that they came up with that idea as well, and they really want it to happen. Now, as you saw in the video, there was a pop-up of climate change. And what's very interesting about this is that the utilization of half-truths is so key. And you can even take a present problem, such as environmental pollution, and you can twist that narrative, that truth, into a way that directs people to see it the way you want them to see it, so that they will accept your plans, your implementation of more control. Now, I have a whole list here, and they all have their role to play. The systemic racism issue, the Black Lives Matters versus Antifa. We've got the food supply issues, wars, refugees, the overpopulation issue, infectious disease scares. In all of these, there's some element of truth, and there is also great amounts of manipulation. And what they do is they get a lot of people on board by appealing to their better inner natures and trusting that no one will investigate the actual scientific data, so that they will react emotionally from an emotional level. And that's when they can direct the energies and the attention of great masses of people. They can take that wonderful beneficial energy and use it for their own purposes. And this is why we've seen in the past a lot of people who've been part of movements, and as they become older, they've become disillusioned and they just accept the system as it is because nothing had changed and they couldn't understand why. We don't realize that we ourselves are enough, that we ourselves have everything we need, and that the most effective things we can do are the changes we directly make in our own lives and in our local communities. And if we all did that, we would greatly contribute to our lives and the lives of those around us. And that is the biggest con of all, is depriving people of that truth. Mark Twain has said that it is easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. So let's look at the intentional destruction of nations. And this is intentionally creating problems like we've seen with the responses to COVID-19, which again, if you haven't looked at part 1, the science, please do, to see that the data does not match the measures that have taken place. One of the things we're seeing is the debt of nations going through the roof. And that is intentional because that is going to reach for a demand of the digital dollar, which is where the global governing body wants the financial system to go. And they want to use their specific blockchain technology. The unemployment, massive unemployment, and evictions as well are key for many reasons, a couple of which are to stoke unrest and anger and tension. And the other is to get people to jump on board with the universal basic income, which, as wonderful as it sounds, is another level of control because it's going to be offered on their specific blockchain technology and tied into a social credit system. The protest that happened around the US was definitely a concerted, organized effort and not from the best of intentions. We do have people involved in protest who do have the best of intentions, but their energy is being directed in a location that is distracting from the groundwork being laid out, the destruction of small businesses, intentional destruction, the destruction of cities, the dropping of housing prices around those areas. And there's a reason for that. Small businesses are dying by the thousands, and no one is tracking the carnage. And with the stricter lockdowns that are starting to come into play, that's being influenced by the IMF COVID-19 relief funding that has a condition for implementing stricter lockdowns to be able to give funds to places that are hurting, whether they're independent states in the US or provinces or countries. This is destroying the small businesses. And why is this so important? There's a couple of reasons. Remember, everything is multifaceted, it's not just one thing or the other. But the destruction of small businesses, one, funnels the wealth of people into the big corporations who are making massive profits off of what's going on right now. And the other thing is that it's destroying the middle class and it's destroying financial independence for some people. And those are key for the goals that they want, the social engineering, the new picture of the new world order. Just as coronavirus was coming out, this was published on April 16th, and not just in the US, but elsewhere, there were people released from prison. Now, the question is who was released and who decided which prisoners were released, and where did they go and what did they do? Releasing 16,000 US inmates might sound great as a headline or maybe sounds scary to you, I'm not sure. But if you look into it, There's a prison system that's called a 3 strikes system, and you can be released on condition that you must do something for whoever is allowed your early release. You become a slave. And we've had the organized riots. This is directed intentional destabilization with the well-known strategy of divide and conquer, making people fight each other, creating opposing sides so that, and infusing it with inciting violence and trying to make sure that nobody actually sees each other as equally human and talking to each other. And this is the problem reaction solution that's being brought up. Now, if you think that the lockdown measures, extensions of police powers, the violations of rights, the mask mandates, contact tracing, tech surveillance, and quarantine camps are only temporary, then you are not really awake to the reality. It doesn't matter in the US which president gets in here. There's too much money invested in these things. They are rolling out no matter who is in office. It doesn't matter whether we all wear a mask today or if the virus goes away. These are all going to stay. I'm just going to give you some examples of what were temporary measures that ended up becoming permanent because they were always meant to be permanent. That includes the income tax in Canada, which was implemented during World War I as a wartime measure, but then never went away. That includes the airport security, the TSA, that was put in place because of the terrorism threat. And now it's even more high tech, and it's not going away. It's actually going to get much more technological and surveilling people and tracking. So why is this? And on top of this, before I go further, when I say violations of rights, it's important to understand what the UN Declaration of Human Rights has stated. And if you don't know that, please look it up. Because these rights cannot be overridden by any emergency. And there's a very good reason for that. When these rights are overridden, in our history, when that has happened, that's when some of the most barbarous acts have taken place. So it is the desire, the deep inner desire of humans who wish for the well-being of the world to protect those rights. It is very important to do so. It's very important to understand that those rights are inherent. You are born with them. They are not granted to you by governments. The governments cannot overstep them. That is why constitutions and charters are written, to remind them they cannot overstep those rights. So when I talk about UN Agenda 21, this was actually something that it is a document from the UN. You can look it up. And when I say the UN, I don't mean every single person who's in the UN is involved in this, but we do have key groups of people, and there are global organizations they are attached to that allow them to get away with the measures that they do. Now, Agenda 21 was renamed later Agenda 2030 with their Sustainable Development Goals. And in the US, they've adopted the name of the Green New Deal. In Canada, they're calling it the Green Reset, and the World Economic Forum has the Great Reset. And they all share pretty much the same goals. So I'm going to give you a bit of an idea of what exactly Agenda 21 is and how it's functioned. And this was signed in 1992 by 179 countries. And ever since then, there have been changes made in countries around the world that have brought us to where we are today.
If you go to lilyspad.ca right now, you will find a link to this. We've started a liliespad.ca bookstore so that when we're talking about books, you will be able to find it. One of the books you'll be able to find there is Behind the Green Mask. It is a book that you need to read. It's on Agenda 21, an issue that we have been following for some time, and its author, Rosa Koire, joins us now from San Francisco to talk about this UN framework that looks to take over your local government. Rosa, good to speak to you. I wonder if you can start off by telling the audience your definition of Agenda 21.
Agenda 21 is the action plan. It's the blueprint to inventory and control all land, water, minerals, plants, animals, construction, means of production, education, information, and human beings in the world. It's a totally comprehensive plan, and it's right there in your town right now.
Well, and I keep being told it's not real. We spoke to Glenn Beck recently. We spoke to Elizabeth Nixon, and then people say, "Oh, you're going on that hoax." Well, this is from the UN's website. It's Review of Implementation of Agenda 21. It's a UN report. Then you've got Resilient People, Resilient Planet. There are 47,900 references to Agenda 21 on the Government of Canada website. But the spookier thing is, you're right, they're going into the towns, and that's part of the plan, isn't it? Get into towns, and it's bureaucrat to bureaucrat so that our politicians often don't even know about it.
It's a global plan, but it's implemented locally. And so that's, it's a global, regional, neighborhood plan. So that's how you see it. And you're going to see it there. Of course, it's in Canada, and you're going to see it as, it'll be Smart Growth Plans and Wildlands Project. So you'll see it as Imagine Calgary or Horizon 2067 in Ottawa or Winnipeg.
Let's show people the Winnipeg plan right now. And they talk about changing your neighborhood. And here it is, possible transformation of neighborhood mixed-use corridor following complete community principles. And it shows you what the street looks like now and what it could look like. And it makes it look like, everyone's got nice, normal cafes, get rid of suburbia. And some people might say, well, what's the big deal? One, it's for the environment. And two, I like the way that looks. What's the problem with Agenda 21 working its way into your neighborhood?
Well, Agenda 21 really is the hijacking of the environmental movement. And there in Canada, you have the Federal Sustainable Development Act, which mandates sustainable development principles in every federal agency. And there's about more than $500 million in federal funds going to implement these plans. And
plans
of course,
that are made elsewhere, right?
Oh, this is a worldwide plan. Your plan, for instance, whatever plan it is in whatever part of Canada, is the same plan in the United States. It's the same as the Hanoi Regional Center 2030 plan. These plans are all the same plan.
Help us understand then how this comes about, that it's all the same plan, because I've been to these meetings and where you're told, well, we want to do smart growth. It's sustainable. They use buzzwords that sound good, but you're right. It is the same plan. It will make everything look the same, and they're talking about making everything looking the same in suburbia.
Yeah, it's not even so much about looking the same, although smart growth is high-density development on transit lines. What it's really about is inventorying and controlling. And it's also about creating artificial scarcity. So it's about limiting your access to your resources. That's the wildland element of the project. And then smart growth, which restricts your ability to use your land. And so when it's federally subsidized high-density development in the centers of your cities, and then you have these charrettes or these visioning projects, which you're invited to come and give your opinion on that great new Imagine Calgary plan, which is the same plan that you'll see all across the world. You're given the impression that you're crafting that plan yourself, but in fact, you are actually being directed to a predetermined outcome using a mind control technique.
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll come by. We'll talk about that. It's called the Delphi technique, and it's part of this process. More with Rosa Koire in a moment.
I felt exactly like you did, when you first heard it. You were like, come on, conspiracy, because, I mean, who names something Agenda 21? So I didn't believe it. And we started doing our research, and it's so overwhelmingly out in the open, you can't believe that nobody else is looking. We have to get this out in every format we can, because who's going to read 2,000 pages from the UN?
That was our interview with Glenn Beck earlier. And if you remember in that interview, Glenn said he is like this with a Liberal Democrat in the States that's fighting this back. Rosa Koire is that Liberal Democrat. She joins us again from San Francisco. Rosa, I want to ask you quickly about the Delphi technique and then get on to Environment Canada doing away with dams and why that is. So explain the Delphi technique while we still have a couple minutes here.
Yeah, this is a technique that you're going to see. Of course, it won't be called the Delphi technique by anyone, and just like you'll never see Agenda 21 called Agenda 21 in these meetings. But it's a meeting where you're invited to come and give your opinion on that cool new plan for the center of your town. And you go in, and it's it's all set up with tables, and you've got your crayons and your little gold stars, and you get to say basically what you want to see. Well, sprawl, which is where many people live, if you live in a single-family home, that's considered unsustainable. That's business as usual, and you're not supposed to choose that. You're supposed to choose your planned future. And so this plan actually directs public opinion while giving them the impression that their input is actually being listened to. And I'll tell you, if you go into those meetings and you dissent, you will quickly find that your opinion is not really crafting this plan. This plan is actually being used to propagandize you and to shut you up if you consider that this is not your idea for what you want to see in your town.
And if you think that Rosa's being foolish in what she's saying there, I've been to some of these meetings. You speak up, you go off the rails. Quickly, Environment Canada getting rid of dams, and this is in a Government of Canada plan. Why would they do that?
Yeah, well, reservoirs, this is the opinion of Environment Canada. Reservoirs emit too many greenhouse gas emissions, and so the plan is for dam removal, which you are seeing, of course, across the United States. And, Canada has 20% of the world's fresh water, and uses hydroelectric, but this is not considered to be sustainable because it's producing greenhouse gas emissions. So Canadians are expected to reduce their water usage, their water consumption.
Because we're running out of water
40%.
so quickly? We're running out of water in Canada?
It's a renewable resource too, yeah. And what else do you guys have besides timber, water, oil, gas, water? So
all the stuff they don't want us to use. So is this a loss of sovereignty? Because you look at these plans, this one here, this report, that report. Canada and every other country that signs on to this has to report back to the UN.
That's exactly right. This is about inventory and control. And globalization is the standardization of systems. So this requires uniformity in all systems, whether it's education, law enforcement, government, energy, all have to be harmonized, all laws. And that means more inventory and control of you. That's what the plan is about.
All right, so that includes things like, we've got about 30 seconds left, Codex, I can never say it, Codex Alimentarius.
Alimentarius.
Codex
Alimentarius.
That is another UN plan that you say is part of this. It is a real thing as well, and that's standardizing our food, our vitamins, everything.
That's right. Yes, it's all over. You'll see it, that Bill C-30, that is Agenda 21. This is what it looks like.
Bill C-30. Wow.
Yes.
Rosa, good talking to you again, and we'll have you back on. Thanks so much for all the work that you do and for keeping an eye on Canada from your perch in California. All the best.
Thank you.
All right. Well, folks, I've been saying forever we need to get out of the UN. We need to drop the United Nations system. And people will say, this isn't real. Look, I've got the report from the UN here. You can do a search. You can do your own search on the Government of Canada website. 47,900 references to Agenda 21, 181,000 references to sustainable development. It's real, it's there. The plan to have the UN determine what our protein content in our beef or what our vitamins are, that is there as well. You can find out more, including Behind the Green Mask, the book by Rosa Koire at the Lily's Pad bookstore. You can find the link at lilyspad.ca. Now, the reason that we're building this bookstore, partnering with Amazon, so you're not dealing with anyone you don't.
Okay, so you know what they're showing you there again is another exposing of one of the con men tricks, and that's the Agenda 21, which dressed itself up in specific localities, but it all promotes the same goals. And the ways to expose it is if you dissent, then it'll be obvious that your opinion doesn't matter. That you will be pushed out of any committee in future that wants to go ahead with this plan. They use buzzwords and language that's very attractive, that appeals to people's better natures. But what they're implementing is not what we imagine. And what they're looking for in this global control is unity in conformity. So they're selling it as this beautiful utopia that's more natural, that has more green space. But in reality, it's going to be controlled by a very few elite, technocratic bureaucrats that are unelected, who we, by going along with this, are giving our consent to have authority over our lives and our choices. And that includes the foods that we choose to eat, where we choose to live, where we choose to travel, instead of accepting unity in diversity. So you need to discover the essence of what's going on by looking at the actions and what's being rolled out.
No, it's Amazon.
So the New World Order mission goals include that one world government, which has a one world central bank and runs on a cashless currency or the digital dollar that will have a social credit system involved. And it will have a one world military that will be its policing power. And that will not just be people, but there will be technology involved in that as well. And we've talked about the end of national sovereignty. This also includes the end of all privately owned property, the end of the family unit, which is an interesting one because when you look on the Black Lives Matter's mission statement, they include that end of the family unit, which makes me, if you see that on somebody's mission statement, you should question, why is that? And what's really the story going on here? Now, depopulation to us sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's actually a goal that's been stated many times, including in the Population Council, and the UN also has a population control group. And they have a desire to have a certain number of people because it's a lot easier to control fewer people than to have many. And I would beseech all of you to investigate the overpopulation story itself, because there are a lot of factors involved that would change the picture dramatically for the population of the world, for human population, and how that actually looks in reality. It's a very interesting story. The multiple mandatory vaccines are included, and there's a good reason for that. The universal basic income, everybody needs to be, you'll hear the buzzwords of equity, and everybody is going to be on one equitable level, but that needs to have the destruction of the middle class because they need to drop everybody down to a low level, and everybody will be equal on that level. And that is how it's going to work out. We've got the microchipping, the digital tracking, and we're seeing that playing out now with the phone apps and what we're going to have with the proof of vaccination and the digital quantum dot tattoos. The 5G that is going up is a key part of this monitoring system that's happening. It's the Internet of Everything. So they have the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Everything includes human beings. the government-raised children, government-owned and controlled schools, the end of private transportation. All businesses will be owned by government or corporations. You'll have the restriction of non-essential air travel, which we're seeing big time happening right now. And human beings will be concentrated into human settlement zones, which are smart cities that will be designated in certain regions. There will be the end of irrigation and private farms, the end of single-family homes. So we're seeing something being implemented that's going to look a lot like what we're seeing in cities in China. The high rises, the small square footage, you'll have the smart meters controlling how much energy and water you use and shutting it off at certain amounts, and so on. So this is quite an interesting set of goals, and you can look this up for yourself and review them. So the World Economic Forum came out and openly talked about how now is the time for a great reset. While all of the pandemic news was going on and many people were afraid, they're trying to push forward their great reset, calling it their best chance to instigate stakeholder capitalism and how it can be achieved. Well, if you go onto their website, you can look and find exactly what they mean by this great reset. And one of them is an infographic that they put together where at the center you have the main core parts in there, and then they have lines connecting them to all of these other issues. So we've got the fourth industrial revolution, which is a key part of this that I'm going to go into a bit because this is about transhumanism, and that has been a big movement for quite some time. You have the strengthening regional development. The regions, again, is going to be big. But some of the key words around this infographic here include Green New Deals, systemic racism, corporate governance, fourth industrial revolution, global health, which they'll have control over and standardize how they want it to be, international security, global governance, drones, for some reason they're on there, blockchain, digital dollar, the digital transformation of business, which we're seeing grow exponentially right now, including the digital transformation of schooling. 5G is included on here, as well as artificial intelligence and the future of mobility. So the fourth industrial revolution, this is actually a video from the World Economic Forum, and this is the advertising video. So just listen to some of this and see what the implications are that they're not saying outright, but that you can gather from this.
We are wondering what is happening to the world. Everything is changing.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
But that was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
With the ability to visualize brain activity, for example, through a simple consumer-based EEG device, it gives us access to ourselves in ways that we've never before thought possible. It unlocks the black box that is the brain and enables us to really, truly be able to realize an identity that is aspirational.
There's now a scientific foundation for the effects of mindfulness on the brain, on the genome, on biological aging. And when the human mind does know itself, then you get the potential for a new renaissance that restructures itself in terms of our relationship to life, our relationship to the planet, our relationship to work.
We need a different economic model. And by that, I don't mean capitalism versus communism. What I'm talking about is a shift in the system along the lines of the two big changes that happened in the 20th century, Keynesianism, with a much greater focus on health and education and the role of government working with business, and then a reaction against that in late century to neoliberalism, where the focus was on free markets, freedom of the individual, and getting governments out of the way. We need a shift to a new system that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, that will live within planetary means, that will be fairer, and that will be focused as its key goal, not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being. And history tells us that a values shift is triggered by creation of a new story about how we want to live.
I see the circular economy as something which fits very closely with mankind's goal to be innovative and creative and to always progress. We can use asset tracking, we can use IT, we can use 3D printing to enable this different economic model to recover materials, feed them back into the economy, and really to decouple growth from the resource constraints we have.
The reason we live in cities is not different today than it was 10,000 years ago. Even if we have got networks connecting us, we still want to have places where we meet in person. So this means the place where we work and the place where we live are much closer to each other, a city where we don't need to have big supply chains in order to produce things, where many things can be sourced locally thanks to 3D printing and robotics. So if we're able to do something to transform cities, to make them more efficient, then the impact can be huge.
Think about the prospect of getting rid of plastics. We must not only be inspired or informed by nature, but actually use natural organisms with which to design products and building parts. Only instead of varying material properties, we're varying biological functionality.
Design is critical today because it's the first signal of human intention. So the question of adding quality to quantity, it isn't a matter of simply circulating things that are potentially toxic. It's circulating things that are safe and healthy for all generations. So the goal is no longer, I want to be less bad, less monotonous, less unsafe, less unjust. It's really about a diverse, safe, healthy, and just world with clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy.
Together we are fighting to preserve our fragile climate from irreversible damage and devastation of unthinkable proportions.
If we think about the original Industrial Revolution, it was an energy revolution. I like to think of it as a kind of bookending of a period in human history during which we used fossil fuels, and it worked very well for us for a long time. But now we have to bring that to an end. We have energy technologies that can power our civilization: solar, wind, biomass. So then the question is, well, how do we get grid integration? Maybe the wind is blowing in Denmark, the sun is shining in Germany, and now you can move that electricity through an integrated grid. You can supply energy to everyone who needs it, and you can supply energy at all times.
Walking around, you do see different stuff as far as like the body marriage line. They use a lot of things that help them lift up and move things to the car. You just sit there and, you know, program something, and it has its own set mind to go ahead and do everything. And then as humans, we just come in and take the extra step to help the technology.
It's not the cure-all for everything. There's definitely a lot of things where people perform the operation better, but certainly for the right applications, robotics are a huge improvement for the process.
The projection of 5 million jobs lost by 2020 to technology is serious, but it's not the main question. Construction, manufacturing, services, public health and education, these industries will still exist. The main question is, what will be the future of work? How will we define work? How will we share the wealth?
From the viewpoint of the labor or jobs, now we really need new education or new training.
We're working with a World in Motion in FIRST Robotics, trying to encourage students from 3rd grade all the way up through the end of high school. We had students make sailboats, and then we had them race them, and so they could see how quickly they could move. And they immediately went back and started to say, oh, I saw what happened, I'm going to go change this or that. And that was 3rd graders.
I just given a prize to a kid of 18 years old that has discovered something really very, very unique. Came up with how to get better productivity and better yields for seeds of corn. And so he basically came with the idea that if you would perforate these seeds, you would get more food. And you think about it and say, but he didn't go to university. So how does he get all that knowledge? And he told me, I mean, I've been watching YouTube since the age of 12, and I'm so interested that I've seen everything about it. I've read everything about it. The world is really open to learning. The thing is, how do you give the incentive to your kids to do that?
It's this ability of digital technology to change outcomes, to truly empower people all over the world that can create a more equitable growth, because I think the world needs that.
Fourth industrial revolution has the potential to make inequalities visible and to make them less acceptable in the future, and hopefully to gather and garner political support to take the necessary decision to reduce the gap.
Humans have always been using tools, but because of the recent advances in technology, we're beginning to have machines that can augment us in all sorts of interesting ways.
I was the first person in the world to be able to voluntarily move my legs while stepping in a robot by exciting the nervous system using electrical stimulators directly onto the spine. We believe that a cure will be possible if enough of the right people have the will to fast-track a cure for paralysis.
We take two things from the patient. First, we take a three-dimensional X-ray, and we extract the three-dimensional data out of that so we can make a perfectly shaped puzzle piece. And then we also take a sample of fat tissue from the patient so that we can extract the stem cells out of those. And we use those stem cells with this three-dimensional scaffold that we fabricate, and after 3 weeks, we have a piece of living bone that's ready for implantation.
Being able to use genome editing to understand the genetic changes that lead to cancer, and technologies like drug delivery, getting molecules into particular types of cells. There's a lot of excitement about being able to move much more quickly on this disease.
One of the things that I think is so essential to free and open societies is freedom of thought. And up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotion, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely, to think divergent thoughts, to think creative thoughts. And in a society where people fear having those thoughts, the likelihood of being able to enjoy progress is significantly diminished.
We need to take responsibility at every level of society, from the individual and the personal to the institutional to the global, to adapt to these technological challenges and changes, which are redefining what it means to be human, what it means to work, what it means to be completely embedded in this world.
People always ask me if I'm an optimist or a pessimist. The technology exists, but how do we get it and implement it at the scale we need at a price that people around the world can afford?
Even though we have everyday problems we have to solve, we have to find a way to lay the foundations for the innovations of tomorrow.
Okay, Okay, and so that is the sales pitch for the fourth industrial revolution. And if you want to dig into this more, you can actually get the book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which was written by Klaus Schwab, and look into that. Klaus Schwab has also come out with a book on COVID-19, The Great Reset. And you can look into how they are using this as a macro reset around the world to implement all of the changes, the technological utopia that they envision. What's important to walk away from with this is, in essence, they are presenting a future and they are controlling your perception to say that this technology is it's inevitable, it's coming. If you don't accept it, then you're going to be left behind. If you don't accept human 2.0, if if not, then you're going to be seen as inferior, and that's going to develop. There's a lot of language and use of images in here that's very much like propaganda, and you could dissect it piece by piece. But this is basically creating the notion still that our lives and the betterment of our lives is dependent on technology. And without this technology, we are not going to have a wonderful, beautiful life. And I would ask you to investigate how they get this technology. What resources do they need to extract to build this? How is it being used? And are the effects that we're seeing from technologies that are already here, are they actually bettering humanity and bettering the planet, or have they caused more harm than good? And if so, where can we go with that information? How can we change that aspect? And when it comes to the knowledge of farming and knowledge in general, they're proposing the idea that the knowledge that's being shared from the internet is really what's helping people to come up with solutions around the world. But this is really a narrow aspect of how knowledge is gained from living. And it's presenting an idea that without this technology developing, we are ignorant. And it's quite a curious thing to think about, because if you, for example, just look at the work from Vandana Shiva and all of the knowledge and wisdom she discovered from illiterate farmers in India who knew the seasons and the earth and the seeds that they worked with so well, that the way that they grow things there is so suited to the environment and to the changes in the weather. They're so much better than genetically modified crops that are sprayed with chemically produced pesticides and so on. And there are other ways that are less harmful of acquiring knowledge and of working with our environment in a way that's beneficial for humans and for the planet. But this is the propaganda video. So, Human 2.0, they're talking about soon we won't be able to recognize what human is, the difference between, humans as biological entities and artificial entities. And part of the way that's going to happen is with the delivery of nanoparticles and vaccinations. And if you haven't looked at the part one of the investigation series into the science, I would recommend that you do. For now, I'm going to talk about how this idea itself has its roots based in eugenics, which is basically the perceived duty of the superior to manage the population. So this key technology of nanoparticles, it can be injected using a vaccine that has hydrogel or as a gel on the skin. It can be aerosolized. It can be inserted through a blood transfusion. They're also finding, and this is as of September of this year, they've published that these unprotected strands of DNA or RNA can be transported safely across cell membranes using an ultrasound delivery system. And applying the ultrasound waves creates bubbles, and when the bubbles implode, they create a jet of fluid that penetrates the cell, carrying the nucleic acid inside. This is a process called transfection. So this is an article from the Economist Open Future Project interviewing author Jamie Metzel on his book Hacking Darwin. And some of the quotes there are quite interesting. And this wasn't this year, but was actually published in April of 2019. He talks about how we're going to deploy gene editing tools that he says are far more precise than today's CRISPR systems to make heritable genetic changes to our future offspring. What we're talking about is the epitome of the desire for control over what happens in life. He says that over the coming decades, Darwin's original concept of random mutation and natural selection will gradually give way to a process that is far more self-guided than anything Darwin could have imagined. We could use these tools to undermine our common identity as a species and social cohesion. So he says we urgently need to start preparing for what is coming. This is the transhumanism movement. He says if we thought that debates over abortion and genetically modified crops were contentious, wait until the coming debate over genetically modified people arrives. So eugenics basically was the name of a science, a sort of science. It was more of a belief that was developed by Sir Francis Galton, who theorized that human evolution would regress if societies prevented their weakest members from being selected out. So a lot of people jumped on board with this and they really believed in it. A lot of influential people. This idea was not limited. It spread far and wide and it was quite popular. It was embraced by mainstream scientific communities and championed by luminaries like Alexander Graham Bell, John Maynard Keynes, Woodrow Wilson, and Winston Churchill. Many of the early adopters of eugenic theories were American progressives who believed science could be used to guide social policies and create a better society for all. That sounds very much like technocracy. Major research institutes like the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, which is still in existence, funded by the likes of the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Institution, and the Kellogg Race Betterment Foundation, provided a scientific underpinning for a progressive eugenics movement that grew in popularity as genetic determinism swept the US. The American Association for the Advancement of Science put its full weight behind the eugenics movement through its trend-setting publication, Science. So we see here a widely accepted, mainstream scientific movement that was in the US, it was in Britain, it was in Europe, it's in China. It's pretty much all around the world. I mean, you can look at issues where anybody of any group, this tribalism, this sense that we are better than you, or you must submit to us, or you must, take a knee, so to speak. That is a dangerous and slippery slope that has historically resulted in acts of genocide and barbarism. So in Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, he wrote that the stronger must dominate and not mate with the weaker. He was an adopter of this eugenics science. He says that only the born weakling can look upon this principle as cruel. And if he does so, it is merely because he is of a feebler nature and narrower mind. For if such a law did not direct the process of evolution, then the higher development of organic life would not be conceivable at all. He says that since the inferior always outnumber the superior, and this is where the population control comes into play, the former would always increase more rapidly if they possess the same capacities for survival and for the procreation of their kind. And the final consequence would be that the best in quality would be forced to recede into the background. Therefore, a corrective measure in favor of the better quality must intervene, for here a new and rigorous selection takes place according to strength and health. And this is how some people can start to view other people as dispensable, where they can perform scientific and medical experiments on certain people because they're not seen as equal, they're seen as inferior, and their life is not worth the same. This is why it's so important to understand your human rights and to protect them. One global militarized police force is another aspect of this. And this is the main reason behind the calls to disband the police locally. Now, yes, again, it's a multifaceted issue. There are problems that have developed in police forces around the world in terms of excessive violence, and we're going to go into that. But the call for this solution, this type of solution, there is the reason behind this, and that is because your local police forces are what stand between you and this one global militarized police force. So they have to go. A one world government needs to maintain control with a global militarized police force that will be enhanced through the use of digital surveillance, drones, artificial intelligence robots, smart meters, and more connected through the global 5G network. And we know that throughout this whole process of the pandemic, the 5G technology has rolled out with the antenna and the satellites, and Elon Musk's SpaceX has been involved in launching thousands of satellites throughout this year and starting last year in 2019 for the 5G network to be put into place. So, how did the police, the local police forces, get to be so militarized? Well, the Pentagon had a program in the US in particular, we're going to look at them as an example, of militarizing their local police forces. Created as part of 1997's National Defense Authorization Act. Remember, this is after the 1992 signing of Agenda 21. The 1033 program allowed the Department of Defense to get rid of excess equipment by passing it off to local authorities who only had to pay for the cost of shipping. There was a precursor to this program, the 1208 program that began in 1990. According to Law Enforcement Support Office, which oversees the process, over $7.4 billion of property was transferred since the program's inception. More than 8,000 law enforcement agencies were enrolled in this. On top of that, police officers have systematically been taken and given training in terrorism and crowd control in Israel, which is technically, when you look at the way that Israel operates, an apartheid state that has been systematically destroying the Palestinian communities. Now, this is not an opinion. This is just based on the actions, the behavior that is well documented, and you can look it up for yourself. But they teach training for this crowd control and to fight terrorism to these police officers that is very violent. And this is brought back to local police forces. So those who are trained overseas will then train others in their police force. And one of the things that they were trained on is kneeling on the neck of a perpetrator. So this is something to consider to get that bigger picture, that bigger grasp of what's really happening. Now, the global surveillance and policing means that every aspect of our life will be monitored and controlled by these unelected experts. If you refuse vaccination, you may not be able to take the bus, fly on a plane, shop in a store, attend a concert, receive a loan, and so on. They may not officially make it mandatory, but all of these conditions will be put into place that will make life incredibly difficult, almost impossible. This is already playing out in China, and it is currently rolling out in Australia and New Zealand. And for example, over the summer, we found out that residents of Ohio will have their COVID test results added to the police database. One of the groups involved in this surveillance is the one developing ID 2020, that digital ID. Again, they're selling you the idea that this is inevitable, this is happening, and we need to get on board and do it right. And they're going to sell it to you in pretty language and with all the safety and privacy things mentioned, but they're going to trust that nobody's going to actually look into it. That's part of the plan. Now, who's involved in ID 2020? Well, we've got Microsoft and Gavi, two really important players in this push for a new world order. Now, Gavi is controlled by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as Microsoft is a Bill Gates venture. And Gavi, as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, are both sponsors of the World Health Organization. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at this point is the largest donor to the World Health Organization. We'll talk a bit more about that. So the world's largest biometric identification system was implemented in 2019. It's called Aadhaar, and this was implemented in India with roughly 1 billion registered users representing nearly all of India's 1.3 billion population. Microsoft founder Bill Gates reportedly supports the initiative, and he should because he was intimately involved in it and has worked with the World Bank to try and implement the idea in other countries. So this is something that has been played out. When we talk about biometrics, they're fingerprinting, eye scans, and it's connected then to the digital dollar, which was put into place while they try to eliminate cash. So there's a control there of income. Another aspect is the trust stamp. That is a biometric hash solution with MasterCard on children's vaccine record system, and this has been playing out in Africa. This was reported on July 6th of 2020. So MasterCard, you'll see, is another player that's involved here. But again, Bill Gates is involved in this as well. And you have the CoviPass immunity passports that are slated to roll out in 15 countries that will determine whether you can go to a restaurant if you need a medical test, or if you're due for a talking to by authorities in a post-COVID world. And from biometricupdate.com, we have the government digital ID programs launched in the UK that are said to be coming to New Zealand and Australia. So this biometric data, again, doesn't necessarily have to be on your phone, but can be stored under your skin. And we talked a bit about this in part one, the science, the quantum dot tattoo, that's been delivered not only at MIT, but in other places, such as, I believe, a nanotechnology place in Australia. So again, what this does is it leaves a specialized dye underneath the skin that has your vaccination history and can be screened by a simple smartphone. The development of this was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So overall, the new COVID-19 digital surveillance system is going to include this list of things here. It's a pretty comprehensive list. We've got the contact tracing on phone apps, the DNA databases, and the mass testing is contributing to that. This is going to be involved in what they're hoping to bring about as pre-healthcare, pre-medicine, letting you know you're sick before you're sick, giving you drugs by drone delivery from Amazon that you can treat yourself with before you even know that you have an illness or so on. It's also going to be used for pre-crime. So you have those DNA databases that they can play around with. And the facial recognition technology, temperature scanning, the drones, modified police helmets that use artificial intelligence and temperature scans, the immunity passports, your test results added to police databases, the encouraging of neighbors policing neighbors, collection of your personal contact information if you go out to a restaurant or go to school, the digital dollar, which will make all of your purchases traceable, and that includes the universal basic income on the blockchain technology, which gives total control over personal incomes. Smart meters will give total control over energy and water use. The social credit system will play into that digital dollar and UBI. Quarantine camps will be there for anybody who doesn't go along with this new social order. And you have the control of the internet, which we're already seeing playing out because we have such a monopoly from Google, and Google owns YouTube, and you have Facebook involved, and Amazon is a big player of the internet. So you've got censorship, data collection, and monitoring. The 5G satellite is involved in this surveillance, and the Internet of Everything and artificial intelligence is all included. So prior to COVID-19 happening, I want to kind of put in perspective what we used to think about mass surveillance, and it wasn't that long ago. This comes from a Human Rights Watch in 2019 report on China. And it reported that authorities there were increasingly deploying mass surveillance systems to tighten control over the society. In 2018, the government continued to collect on a mass scale biometrics, including DNA and voice samples, use such biometrics for automated surveillance purposes, develop a nationwide reward and punishment system known as the social credit system, and develop and apply big data policing programs aimed at preventing dissent. All of these systems are being deployed without effective privacy protections in law or in practice, and often people are unaware that their data is being gathered or how it is used and stored. Now, consider what's going on right now and how we're massively, on a global scale, it seems that we're accepting these measures that before, just a year ago, we would have found deplorable. Now, one of the key controls for implementing this New World Order is to have total control over the education and the raising of children, controlling their perception. And that is essentially a nanny state. So this was reported on in the New Internationalist back in 2017. And what happened in the UK was that there was a celebratory summit sponsored by Google that had no fewer than 5 UK government departments represented. And it showed the scope and ambition of the burgeoning ed tech industry, a term that covers businesses that produce everything from digital tools for teaching, testing, and tracking pupils to platforms and operating systems on which whole schools are run. The world's elite, including some of its richest men, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and Eric Schmidt of Google, are all EdTech champions. Amazon's Jeff Bezos is a fan, and eBay founder Pierre Omidyar and fellow billionaire Michael Bloomberg. Rupert Murdoch also invested hundreds of millions of dollars on a plan to transform failing education systems through digital learning. And those in Silicon Valley believe that they can, with enough data, quote unquote, fix education. So take the US school chain AltSchool, backed by Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg and the venture capital fund of Peter Thiel, the person who founded the data mining firm Palantir, that was a CIA company and which will be used to determine which groups of people will get which vaccine and will be involved in tracking them after the vaccinations. AltSchool generates vast amounts of data by tracking its pupils' interaction with technology and a classroom video system. Once that data is captured, AltSchool founder and former Google exec Max Ventilla says, then you're able to start to make inferences and suggestions and so on. So we were already seeing this happening. And in 2019, we saw another report on how digital surveillance of children was occurring, and it was fueled by fears of school shootings. This, again, using fears to implement more measures of control through technology. So what they did then was monitored students through official school emails and chats. So let's look now at the human settlement zones and the smart cities that are going to ease the monitoring of the population. Smart cities are developing around the world, and there are several commonalities which can easily be observed in practice and in literature. And the first is surveillance. So they're going to monitor people using biometric facial scanning, geospatial trafficking, financial data, social media, and so on. A population that's surveilled can easily be controlled. Transportation, of course, is going to be controlled, which is why we're steadily seeing a shift to try to get rid of private vehicles and changing the street structures so that they'll be suited for the very wealthy who can have the self-driving cars that will be able to function with the 5G system that's put into place. And everybody else will be able to use public transportation, which can include scooters, bicycles, buses, light rail. And without your private transportation, you'll be locked into the city and out of the rural area because those areas will be off limits to humans. The third is data, collecting real-time data from the Internet of Everything, which again is an expansion of the Internet of Things to include people. And the fourth is control. So social engineering is always leading the thought process of smart city development. However, unlike unelected political representatives, the social engineers are always self-appointed technocrats who decide what citizens should or should not do, where they should or should not go, with whom they should or should not associate. And we're seeing that playing out now with the social isolation bubbles, being told we can go where we can go, when we can go there, how we should look, what we should put on our face. That's what we should do. It's practices in conceding and obeying. Okay, so in the One World Vision of 2050, which can also be found looking up America 2050, the former national security advisor, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name very well, had said in 1995 that we cannot leap into world government in one quick step. The precondition for eventual globalization, genuine globalization, is progressive regionalization, because thereby we move toward larger, more stable, more cooperative units. So the regionalization and getting rid of the nations is a key part to this that we're seeing developing. And you can look up on Wikipedia the mega regions of the United States, and they mention America 2050. So you can see there that they list 11 mega regions for the United States, Canada, and Mexico all together. And here is an image, and these are going to be the human settlement zones. These will be the designated regional zones that will be serviced from public transit lines, and everything else will be off limits to human habitation, and that's the plan. So I'm going to play a bit of this video here and let you think about what may be going on with the implementation of this part.
The next question, the member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Premier. In my supplemental question yesterday, I asked this government if the people of Ontario should prepare for internment camps. In September, the federal government posted a call for expressions of interest for contractors to supply, provide and manage quarantine isolation camps throughout every province and every territory in Canada. These quarantine isolation camps, however, are not limited to people with COVID, but provide a wide latitude for many people to be detained. Surely this government is aware of the intentions to build these isolation camps from coast to coast. And my question to the Premier is, how many of these camps will be built, and how many people does this government expect to detain?
Question. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is very true that when people leave the country and when they come back in, that the province is suggesting, and the federal government, in cooperation with the federal government, we're suggesting that people isolate.
So I'm just playing that part of the video because the next one, you can look it up on YouTube, but it's a non-answer response. So we'll go on to this next one from Quebec area.
Secret COVID detention centers in Quebec. Forced quarantine? Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Viva Frei Montreal litigator turned YouTuber, and people have been asking me to cover this situation for the last few weeks. On September 2nd, one Dr. Jacques Girard gave an interview that left more questions than answers. Now, just a brief intro for context. Dr. Jacques Girard is the Directeur de la Santé Publique de la Capitale Nationale.
English, do you speak it?
In English, that means the Director of Public Health for the Capitale Nationale, which is a region of Quebec near Quebec City that includes 6 boroughs or 6 other districts. And at first glance, you might be tempted to think that this is a purely local provincial problem, but trust me, the ramifications of this situation go well beyond our provincial border. So during this September 2nd, 2020 update on the COVID situation in the Capitale Nationale region of Quebec, this Dr. Girard, the Director of Public Health for that region, said some things that raised a lot of eyebrows. He suggested forced confinement in facilities, the location of which he would not disclose, forced collaboration with investigations. What he suggested raised a lot of eyebrows. I started getting a ton of emails to look into what he said, whether or not it was true, and whether or not, if true, it is legal. But before we get into any of that, you are going to hear the words straight from the proverbial horse's mouth. Now, it's all in French, and the translation is mine. I did my best. I think I'm pretty good, but don't attack me if something is not 100% accurate in the translation.
Although I think it is, because I'm pretty darn good at translating French to English.
The section of the interview is about 3.5 minutes long. I didn't want to edit it. I didn't want to be accused of having taken anything out of context, but give it a watch. It is fascinating, terrifying, jaw-dropping, eye-opening, any other qualifier you can think of.
Docteur Girard, avant de terminer, il y a une journaliste qui ne pouvait pas être présente ici qui demande brièvement, est-ce que des ordonnances ont été émises à l'endroit des clients récalcitrants?
Yes.
Merci, Docteur Girard.
Est-ce que ça peut être une phrase complète en français?
Oui. L'ordonnance concernait justement 2 personnes qui ne collaboraient pas. Et on trouve que c'est formidable de pouvoir finalement utiliser ce levier-là. Vous savez, avant, si on n'était pas en urgence sanitaire, le directeur de santé publique peut utiliser ce pouvoir pendant 72 heures, en attendant qu'un juge, finalement, là, confirme l'ordonnance. Dans le cas de la COVID-19, nous avons la possibilité d'isoler quelqu'un pendant 14 jours. Et c'est ce que nous avons fait ce matin. Et c'est ce que nous avons déjà fait dans le passé. Et on a aussi, comme on l'a fait ce matin, obligé une personne à collaborer à l'enquête. Et on l'avait déjà fait dans le passé, avec succès, et avec une collaboration extraordinaire des corps policiers.
Merci à tout le monde. Passez une bonne fin de journée.
Quand vous ordonnez quelqu'un pendant 14 jours à rester chez eux, là, c'est pas chez eux que ça se passe. Là. 14 jours, là, le séjour, c'est à la prison dans une cellule de détention.
Est-ce que vous avez l'impression d'être dans une prison? Parce que c'est ça. Souvent, ce qu'on fait, c'est que c'est un endroit. Nous, comme on est le CIUS, en fait, a la possibilité d'offrir justement des isolements préventifs. Ça se passe finalement. C'est une disposition qui est beaucoup plus facile quand on a quelqu'un qui ne collabore pas. Puis ça devient vraiment complexe.
Personne qui est surveillée,
ouais.
Elle est en en isolement, exactement où ça peut être modifié.
C'est pas nécessaire.
C'est ça. Mais est-ce que...
C'est pas à la maison,
c'est pas la... ben, ça dépend de la personne. Parce qu'on a eu des personnes qu'on a isolées chez eux. À un moment donné, la personne, on voyait bien qu'elle n'était pas chez elle. On lui a fait, donc, on est allé chez elle. Et là, on lui a dit, on vous isole là où on veut que vous soyez, ou vous observez la règle. Et il a observé la règle. Donc, vous voyez, ça dépend des cas.
Okay. Vous êtes deux ordonnances. Est-ce qu'il y en aurait une pour collaborer à l'enquête, puis l'autre pour rester à la maison?
Oui, c'est ça. C'est une ordonnance, en fait, où les deux personnes, parce que l'ordonnance, on la transmet aux policiers. Donc, oui. On peut faire sur une ordonnance, on peut identifier plusieurs personnes. En fait, que ça dépend. Là, ça donne, c'est la première fois qu'on fait ça. Généralement, c'est une ordonnance, une personne là, qui est récalcitrante, là, qui ne coopère pas.
OK, donc deux ordonnances, puis une pour collaborer à l'enquête, puis l'autre pour rester à la maison.
Oui, c'est une disposition légale émise par l'ordonnance qui nous permet justement d'obliger ces personnes-là contre leur gré. Il faut bien le dire, hein, c'est ça, mais dans l'intérêt public. Pardon?
On préférerait sortir de ça.
C'est une ordonnance dans laquelle on a oui, parce que c'est une technicalité là, juridique là, que je ne demandez-moi pas de l'expliquer. C'est les avocats qui gèrent ça, là, mais c'est comme ça que ça se passe.
In his answers to the reporters, you have Dr. Girard actually confirming that you can have forced arrests, forced detention, forced compliance with investigations, failing which you can be put in an undisclosed location for up to 14 days. I am sure I'm not alone in the sentiment that these are not the hallmarks of a free and democratic society. These are the trademarks of a fascist and tyrannical society. But
So I would recommend having a look at that video if you're more interested. This is from Viva Frey on YouTube, the forced quarantine and secret facilities in Canada. And it's just something to consider about what is the real motivation behind these forced facilities, since they're not specific to people who test positive for COVID-19. And again, in part one, the science, we look into the issues with the testing and the cases as they're identified currently. But it has broad implications for all of us that we need to consider, as well as the medical powers or the authoritative powers of medical professionals who were not elected to have those powers and exercise them over us. So there's a lot playing out here that is happening quite swiftly, that's really changing the landscape and trying to determine a future that may not be the direction we
emotions
want to
and
go.
political...
So UN Agenda 2030, I'm going to look now at the partners who are included in this. The leading partners of the United Nations Global Goals Project, they themselves will reveal the real technocratic agenda that lies behind the polished feel-good facade. It involves a plan to fully integrate mankind into a technological surveillance apparatus overseen by a powerful artificial intelligence. The current pandemic scare has been a perfect trigger to kickstart this agenda. Now, if you tune out when you hear certain words like agenda, I would recommend that you stop for a moment and just decide to listen to this with open-minded skepticism. You don't have to decide what to think about it. Just take it in, and with all the other data that you know from your own experience, from other sources, you can come to your own conclusions. So the first leading partner is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We also have the Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Ford Foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, the UN Foundation, and Open Society Foundation that was created by George Soros. These are names you might have heard bandied about, but you may not actually know much about their history and their track record of things that they've been involved in, how they were developed, where their money has gone to, and it would be important to look into those. The World Economic Forum is also in that top group. Avanti Communications, a British world-leading provider of satellite technology to military and government projects, they are delivering a world-spanning connectivity to realize the world brain where all human activity can be tracked and analyzed in real time. And as mentioned in that fourth industrial revolution, they're talking about how we're going to have access to everybody's thoughts and emotions through technology. So there will be a need, so they say, to create a safe space where people can think what they want because their thoughts will be out there and basically controlled. And it sounds crazy, but just look into this technology, look into Elon Musk's Neuralink project and others to see what has been developed and what they're hoping to accomplish. So another partner is 2030 Vision, a technology partnership that connects businesses, NGOs, and governments with technology and expertise. Multinational tech giant Google, who's already intimately tracking users and their behaviors. American global payment and technology company MasterCard, who are a key player in developing the digital ID. As we've touched on, the CEO of MasterCard is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations as well as World Economic Forum's International Business Council. American corporation Salesforce, a cloud based software company headed by Mark Benioff, is also a contributor, and he himself is one of the board directors of the World Economic Forum. UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, is also involved. They're a UN agency that will ensure that no child will be left behind from being integrated into the digital panopticon. So, how can so few people have such influence and have such control? Well, if you want to dig into this, I would recommend looking at this report. It's over 80 pages. It's Philanthropic Power and Development: Who Shapes the Agenda? And this specifically looks at how, starting with the Rockefeller Foundation and then taking over with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, how and why these foundations were developed, where their money went into, and the purposes behind creating this control over two specific key areas here in this document. They talk about the control over global health and agriculture, food and agriculture. So, what we've seen play out actually is the greater implementation of genetically modified crops and the use of pesticides around the world. And we see, the reporting of, oh, we're helping people in countries that need it. We're giving them healthcare and supplies. But when you dig into the actual facts of the situation, what we're seeing is that the policies that they have control over are actually very detrimental, and they're not helping anybody to come out of poverty or to improve their health status. One great series is written by Derek Brose, an investigative journalist, and you can find it on thelastamericanvagabond.com or just do a search for Derek Brose, and it's Bill Gates' Web of Dark Money and Influence, and you can have a look. And of course, everything is cited by these the references that I give to you here. So when you look at Derek Brose's work, you can check all of his sources and come to your own conclusions. So Edward Bernays, he was a pioneer of corporate PR and propaganda, and he was quoted as saying that those who manipulate the unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our taste formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men and women we have never heard of. In almost every act of our lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we're dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind. And if you question this, I want you to think about how much is invested in advertising campaigns. There are actually psychologists who are used to gain data on advertising campaigns so that they can get their targeted audience to desire their products, to desire their plans. This isn't this is something that is widely practiced. And if you just sit and for a moment examine where your own thoughts and desires are coming from, what is influencing them. It could be what you're watching on TV, what you're getting up on social media, all of that data information that's coming in. And there's tricky ways to go about it, which are well known, that will go into your subconscious mind so that they control your behaviors without you consciously being aware of it. Now, this is our current paradigm, and we've all been led to believe that this is the way the world runs, this is the way it works, and that is why it can work like this. That is why money equals power equals influence, because we believe that money equals power equals influence. So, as I mentioned at the start of this, the destruction of smaller businesses has led to a funneling of wealth into the bigger corporations and billionaires. It was reported by Business Insider and others. They got $673 billion richer during the pandemic period. Now, this is a quote from Nathan Rothschild, where he states that I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. If you create an idea that something, some object holds value, and then you control that object that holds value, now you've created a perception that then becomes widely accepted. And then you are perceived to have the power because you control the bulk of that object that we give value to, a sense of value to. Now, that gives you power, that gives you influence because we perceive things to be that way. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it is true. So, where is this money going? Well, as I mentioned before, the World Bank and the IMF were giving COVID aid conditionally. And the conditions were that those who were given the aid would have to impose extreme lockdowns and curfews. Another part was the exposing that some of the organizations doing the rioting, like Antifa, were being funded. There are groups paying these looters money to come in, and they're getting paid by the broken windows, said Bellevue's chief of police, Stephen Milet. So this was around June, and they talked about how throughout the last weekend, there were also reports of large pallets of bricks showing up in riot-torn areas in multiple cities across America. Now, somebody has to back this and pay for this. The riots themselves cost retailers billions of dollars at a time when they were already suffering from the lockdown policies. What's interesting to note is the timing of these riots right after Memorial Day weekend, and we'll go into that. So this is the distraction game. If you, as the person who's pulling the strings and you want to do the social engineering and make things happen, well, you can do that best from behind the scenes, and you can do that best by making people think that the other people that they live with are their enemies so that they fight each other instead of what's the real cause behind societal issues. This is the distraction game. So what are the recent examples of this throughout the lockdowns is the George Floyd death. The timing of this is key because it happened right after Memorial Day weekend when the lockdown protests were building, when police officers were speaking out publicly saying they would not enforce these lockdown policies because they violated the Constitution and they took an oath to protect your rights. So we had this on video recorded death of a Black man by a white police officer. And then the day after, there were riots all over the United States, but not only there, in other countries around the world. This was a coordinated effort. The riots themselves focused on destruction of small businesses, and they did not go to specific neighborhoods. They went to minority neighborhoods. They went to anywhere that was they could to make that destruction. They terrorized the cities. This was on purpose. And it was also on purpose to mix up the riots with the protest in the media. So the contact tracing that was being introduced at that time was then used to target legal protesters. This again is a multifaceted attack. Then we have the censorship, and that was playing out through the Black Lives Matters movement. The censorship, which is destroying free speech, which is the first thing to go if you want to have tyranny. Free speech is so important. That's why it is the first mention in the Bill of Rights in the United States. This is also being used to destroy small businesses because businesses now on Yelp are being labeled as racist if one person just makes a statement of claim that does not need to be investigated. This is also divisive, using language to divide us. We're being made to believe that words have inherent meaning when language is actually mutable. When open listening is listening to another person without making assumptions as to what they mean in their language, but taking the whole picture through their conversation. This is a controlling mechanism. And the politics game is involved in this, the right versus the left, creating more division, more polarization, more distraction. When, as I stated at the beginning, and as Nathan Rothschild has said in his quote, it does not matter which puppet sits on the throne, because the one who has the wealth controls the strings and will implement their policies regardless. So the bioterror threat is being used to push ahead the agenda, and the groundwork for this as well has been laid over a period of time. This is the way that you can do predictive programming. It's over a period of time that you have little bits of introduction to this idea so that it gets into the subconscious. So the viral pathogen narrative is one of those. And just a few of the more recent events for governments that were put on include training exercises such as Dark Winter, that was the anthrax, before the anthrax event in 2001, Crimson Contagion in 2016, and Event 201 in 2019. When it comes to the media and movies and programming, the LA Times reported in April of this year, in a freakish coincidence timing, Pandemic premiered on Netflix in late January, just as the novel coronavirus was beginning its rampage. Over 6 episodes, the series issues uncomfortably prescient warnings about the risk of a new respiratory virus that could, within a matter of months, overwhelm the planet. What's most interesting about that pandemic series is that of the scientists featured in there, there were the people who are key in developing the remdesivir antiviral therapeutic drug, and they themselves have been funded heavily by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's easy to see how predictive programming can occur when you see that 6 corporations own all of the media. And if you hold the money, you can control the narrative. If you buy a media outlet out, you can control what content they can have on there. So if you want to look into how all roads lead to dark winter, as has been repeated by Joe Biden most recently, but by others as well in the US, then I'd recommend looking at Whitney Webb's expose series on this. And as well, she cites all of her sources so you can investigate. So let's have a look at the highlights reel from Event 201 and just see how eerily this played out a coronavirus pandemic in October 8 of 2019, before coronavirus, COVID-19, was said to be on the rampage.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree, unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
The mission of the Pandemic Emergency Board is to provide recommendations to deal with the major global challenges arising in response to an unfolding pandemic. The board is comprised of highly experienced leaders from business, public health, and civil society.
We could be looking at double the number of cases in 1 week and 16 times as many in a month if we are not able to stop the spread. That would be on the order of 500,000 cases, and it would continue to rise exponentially. In 3 months, we could be approaching 10 million cases.
We're at the start of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic. And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together.
We have known about CAPS-like viruses in animals and people for decades, but have not been successful at developing a licensed vaccine. And sure, there are new technologies that may help, but it's going to be difficult. I am not optimistic about having a vaccine in time to be relevant during this pandemic.
So the policy crisis in question for this board in this meeting is this: how should governments, business, and international organizations allocate and distribute pandemic antivirals and medical supplies to the people who need them most?
What we've seen work very well in the HIV field is, in fact, procurement through the Global Fund. So having a centralized mechanism, so financially able to procure on behalf of affected countries would be critical. I think the second thing is it's going to be very important that for the business sector, for manufacturers of antivirals, that we have clarity around what the need is and where the need is and who are making the decisions.
I think that given that the countries most affected are those that are low and middle income countries with unequal access to technology, to finances, the UN has a worldwide footprint, universally recognized, and universal membership.
A global stockpile would certainly help ensure more rational and strategic allocation, but the reality is that we don't have the logistics capability, even within the UN, to bring that together in one place and run it. So this is where I think a collaboration between the international organizations like the World Health Organization and the private sector, which runs these supply chains for many purposes every day. Understand where the supplies are, make smart decisions about how to allocate them to the people who need them in the places that need them the most, and then work with the industry to move those supplies from where they are today to where they need to be.
Just to underscore the point that cooperation among supply chain providers or businesses that have huge supply chains can add a lot of efficiency to the whole process.
The question is, can you, through this international mechanism, really promote commitments to doing this as quickly as possible and give people a sense that actually if they contribute more, that they will have a better chance of protecting their own populations and their country's security and health.
So to be completely clear, most of this production would already be committed in contracts.
Yes.
It is almost unheard of that people are producing product without having a forward commitment for the consumption of that product. So the first thing that needs to be done, because this is not something that the countries currently control, unless countries are going to bring about emergency situations and co-opt an existing supply chain.
I think it's not likely, I agree, that countries are not going to buy countermeasure to put into a global supply without retaining a large portion of it for themselves.
Public health agencies have issued travel advisories, while some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas. As a result, the travel sector is taking a huge hit. Travel bookings are down 45%, and many flights have been canceled. A ripple effect is racing through the service sector. Governments that rely on travel and tourism as a large part of their economies are being hit particularly hard.
How should national leaders, businesses, and international organizations balance the risk of worsening disease that would be caused by the continued movement of people around the world against the risks of profound economic consequence of travel and trade bans?
If there's some sense that there's a UN institution that can do all of this, then I worry we're suffering from a delusional disorder on the power of the UN. It's really important to get those industries and their trade associations and an efficient leadership established, which is decentralized, but has a collective responsibility and accountability. And that needs to be supported by the public leadership.
What is essential, what is non-essential travel, we have to clarify this. Otherwise, if we go down to 20% bookings over a long period, the company will run down. That's a fact.
You know, there's a whole complex set of issues in a highly interdependent world on supply chains that are just in time. We need to think about how much flex there is in that just-in-time supply chain system and make sure it keeps running. I think it's going to take specificity, and it's going to take knowledge that only the private sector has. The UN.
So I would recommend you can watch the rest of this video. This is just the highlights reel, and you can actually see more in-depth videos when you look up Event 201, and you can go on to the centerforhealthsecurity.org website to get more information about how that played out and who were the people around the table, who was involved in this.
Can play an important.
So another great resource is looking at the work of investigative journalist John Rappaport and his creation of a false epidemic series. Included in this is part of an interview he had with a man who was involved greatly in propaganda. And he talks about a step up. And this is one in which the quote unquote bad guys keep going one intrusion after another. Now, if you looked at part one, the science, you'll know how big pharma qualifies as organized crime for what they have committed and been charged for in the past, and how they will keep doing and increasing the crime if it pays, and it does. So this is like a step up, one intrusion after another. If there's a positive response to it, they'll keep doing it. So it isn't just West Nile, it's West Nile and then SARS and then bird flu and then swine flu and then Ebola and then Zika. It's all one package, with the idea in this case that they'll slowly wear down the resistance and people will buy in, they'll buy the story, they'll buy the lie. What they really want is for people to obey. That's the whole essence, obey. It's not only about fake epidemics and getting vaccines, it's about operant training in obeying. In general, they want you to obey them, they command, you go along. So, a lot of this I know may sound like conspiracy theory, but the sad truth is that this is really happening right now while we're all being distracted with COVID 19. A large part of this new world order is going to be the biosecurity paradigm. And the new terrorist for this, the new threat that will keep us in control, are going to be the asymptomatic carriers, quote unquote carriers, people who have a virus that's so deadly that they don't even know that they have it. So, and just to go back for that, one video that I would recommend watching is from the CorbettReport.com COVID 9/11 from Homeland Security to Biosecurity and how that has played out. We have healthy people, not with any symptoms, who are being arrested and muzzled for expressing their freedoms, their inherent human rights. Now, again, if you're unfamiliar with the documentation on this, look at the US Bill of Rights, look at the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you look at the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And if you're unfamiliar with the science, then look at my part 1 video investigating the science. I will follow this up with the webinar on Know Your Rights and Tools to Protect Them. Because when you understand the foundational basis for what's happening, you can see the big picture of what's really going on, and you can see how to effectively, either if you decide to choose to go along with it, or if you decide not to, what you can do. But what they're hoping for all of us to do is to accept the fourth industrial revolution. They want genetically engineered humans who are biometrically monitored. They want a social credit system with a universal basic income that is centrally controlled. They want a one world government that is composed of unelected technocratic experts. They want a one world police force that has artificial intelligence using 5G and the Internet of Everything. And they want smart cities in designated human settlement zones for a controlled population. The good news about all of this is that that picture that I've just presented to you, that's just one aspect of the way the future can go, and we do not have to accept that new paradigm. Despite how information has been presented and how our perceptions have been controlled, there are other alternatives that may actually suit us each better. Now, those who wish to push in this direction, who are controlling the world right now, they are a minority. And the power that we perceive that they have is only that which we give them. We always have a choice. You, as an individual, are more powerful than you know. And those who are in the seat of perceived power, they fear the day you discover that. Our rights that are written in the Charter in Canada and the Constitution in the US, they were not written to grant freedoms to people, but to recognize the inalienable rights of sovereign human beings that government was not allowed to infringe upon. Your rights are yours alone, and no one has the right to take them away from you unless you give them the power to do so. You can always take your power back. Now, it's important when we talk about human rights, which I'll get further into in the webinar on knowing your rights, that a belief or a fear, especially one that is unfounded, can never justify taking away human rights. Now, if you are fearful and you believe that masks work and you want to wear one, then that is your right. That is based on belief, that is based on your conscience, and you can do that. But it is not your right to make another wear a mask because you are afraid or because you believe that it is right. Informed consent is extremely important. Following the Nuremberg trial of 23 doctors accused of improper experiments on human subjects, a 10-point code was drawn up by the American judges presiding over the military tribunal. The first principle stated, the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. The person should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion. They should also have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. That is what informed consent means. So here are some questions that are important to ask yourself. Is it ever okay for another person to infringe upon your inalienable rights? Really look into that. And is your birth into a preconceived system of living immediate implied consent of how that system works? What is the purpose of your government? Do healthcare authorities have your permission to decide what you do, what you wear on your face, who you see, and so on? Does the government own your body? And if not, do you have the right to refuse medical mandates that infringe upon your bodily autonomy? And if a law is unjust, do you have the right to disobey it? So, what can you do now? If there is something you want to do, that choice is up to you. The first would be to become better informed and to take back control of your life through knowledge. Start to investigate and look at things objectively and see what knowledge you can use to benefit your life. There are activist groups that have formed all over, and you can look them up. Some of them have been attacked and their websites taken down, but there are others. The biggest thing you can do is peaceful non-compliance. That is the best thing we can all do. And if you're knowledgeable about your rights and about the laws, there is nothing that can stop you from peacefully non-complying because you have every right to do so. You have every justification on your side. You have all of the evidence on your side. You can put pressure on your local government officials by making more people aware and having people continue to send in letters and make phone calls. Persistence would be key. So you can help to raise awareness, but do it in a way that you cultivate love and not fear. So, see, freedom is never lost, even if there is only a fool's hope in winning. And the best way that we can connect with people, that we can bridge the artificial divides that have been put into place, that we can help people to unlock themselves from the mental trance of fear, is to cultivate that love, to cultivate open conversation, to allow for questioning and acceptance. Get familiar with your charter rights and freedoms here in Canada. Know the UN's International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Know the Canadian Criminal Code. Look up your province's emergency orders and mask mandates. Read them. Contact store management and ask them about enforcing mask mandates. Who is responsible and who is liable? Know your patient rights, patient bill of rights, and medical freedom. Look up the Canadian medical law on informed consent for medical procedures and medical recommendations. That would include the lockdowns, the closing of businesses, the mandatory testing, the mandatory masks, and so on. And don't be afraid to address problems in any current statutes and legislations. Inform others and be prepared. Build a community, they're your support, and encourage self-reliance in that community to develop. Knowledge itself is of no value unless you put it into practice. We can know of something intellectually, but we do not really know it until we embody it, until it goes past the thought space and into the manifested reality. An example of something you can look at is from 369 Media. You can look up 369media.com and their call to action, ending the declarations of emergency in Canada. And they have a notice of liability for all of the lieutenant governors in every single province. And this is the example, a snapshot of part of that notice of liability for Newfoundland and Labrador. You can sign that. There's also a letter for school boards, principals, and trustees that was created by the Parents for Mask-Free Education under the First Aid Kit for Parents. Go and look at their website. They have great information on masks, on knowing your rights, on school board information, and so on. If you're looking for solutions for how to become self-reliant and how to resist what is going on, then I would recommend going to thecorbettreport.com. It's an open source intelligence news site, and putting in the search engine solutions. And there's over a decade of work put into this aspect. Another thing for people in the US is to get involved in Make Americans Free Again. They are involved in the Ohio landmark lawsuit that is challenging the emergency declaration. And when you form a group and you get big numbers, they can help you to put that type of lawsuit forward in your state as well. So we're going to leave off with this message to humanity from Dr. Pam Popper. And we'll finish with that. So this is from early in October.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the weekly Forbidden News, which I can't post on YouTube, and you'll understand if you haven't seen these videos before, you'll understand when you see the content. It's not, our rulers don't like this kind of information, and they've instructed censorship to take care of it because they don't think that you should hear it. So that should tell you a lot about the world we're living in right now. Before I get into the material I want to share with you today, just a couple of announcements. First of all, for those of you who are members of Make Americans Free Again, we are meeting at our office where I'm sitting, not in this room, but down the hall from here, on Thursday evenings for discussion and review of material. We had our first meeting last week and it was fabulous. And I just encourage you to come 6 o'clock. At our office. We're in Central Ohio, so if you're in driving distance of there, you don't have to do anything except just show up. You don't have to call and make a reservation, or it doesn't cost anything. People congregating with people about common interests is really what it's all about. The other thing that I'll mention to you is that this is a period of time in which a lot of people are making career changes because they have to. And if you've always fancied yourself doing something in healthcare, Or if you're in healthcare and you don't fancy yourself doing what you're doing anymore, you may want to take a look at some of the things that we offer. And of course, I'm always open to discussing with you. My email address is pampopper@msn.com. So this particular piece is from Guy Crittenden. He lives in Canada, and this is about this piece that I'm going to share parts of it with you is about what's going on in Canada, but it's actually going on everywhere. And I feel that anybody in any country will relate to what he's saying, and he's sounding an alarm that I think it's really important that we pay attention to. And so here goes. He says, a great purge is underway. This is a grave message to all my fellow Canadians and our friends throughout the world. Last night, Facebook took down and deleted the organizing pages of several of Canada's most prominent resistance groups. The Line, Hugs Over Masks, and also Mothers Against Distancing, and a related Christmas parade page that MAD had created. Yes, apparently Christmas is canceled, and anyone hoping to organize a parade for children is now an enemy of the state. Let me please provide some perspective on what just happened, even for those who don't agree with the messages and actions of those groups, which are part of and central to a network of such resistance groups across Canada. We are a very long way down the road to fascism now, my friends. According to Naomi Wolf's system, we're at about stage 9 out of 10 for full fascism. We're undergoing a digital book burning at the moment with the deletion of hundreds of channels on YouTube and hundreds of pages and accounts and groups on Facebook and other social media. I received a flurry of emails and messages over the past week from people shocked and outraged that Facebook groups and YouTube deleted channels in which people invested years of their lives with thousands of members, tens of thousands even. As I follow the opposition movement closely, I can attest that the pattern is the deletion of anything that goes against official narratives. You do not know this has happened before, right? You do know that this has happened before, right? Last night was the equivalent of Kristallnacht in Canada, the famous night when Hitler's brown shirts smashed the windows of Jewish stores and engaged in public book burnings. And along that line to this, I have to add, I've been watching videos this morning of Jewish businesses being targeted in New York for enforcement. I watched a video of enforcement officials arriving at a Jewish home because there were 10 people in the house. I guess that's against the law now in New York anyway, coming to a neighborhood close to you. So once again, I'll point out that what this gentleman's writing about is happening in Canada, but it's happening right here in the United States. It's happening elsewhere in the world, and it's going to get worse if we don't stand up and do something. The scattered ragtag groups of ordinary citizens who are extraordinary people, in my opinion, I'm back to reading this guy's essay, have withstood public shaming and ridicule, assaults and smears from our media, and on and on. Why? Because the wisdom of forcing children to wear masks all day, when that can cause brain damage? Because they object to tens of thousands of businesses being bankrupted over a virus we now know is less lethal than the seasonal flu. We now know from the Centers for Disease Control itself that the vast majority of recorded COVID deaths were not from the virus. We know Boris Johnson himself said that the PCR tests are only 7% reliable. I had not seen that myself, but I've been writing and speaking quite a bit about the fact that the PCR tests are not reliable. This is a globalist takeover of the world economy via the central banks using an induced biological crisis to install medical tyranny and then an artificial intelligence control grid, which you might have witnessed has now largely been installed during the lockdown, while you were encouraged to stay home and watch Netflix and order goods from Amazon, while the globalists lit a fire under the middle class that is now largely destroyed. Citizens in places like the province of Ontario, where I live, will be among the last to resist, as most people actually work directly or indirectly for the government, as teachers, doctors, firemen, bureaucrats, nurses, bus drivers, etc. They'll hear the shake on Alpha Centauri when those unionized workers learn their gold-plated pensions are worthless, as they soon will be when the oligarchs short the market again and crash it for good. For now, they're joining the chorus of corporatized CBC propaganda machine, criticizing dissidents and even smearing a professor who doesn't agree with the government as a Russian agent. Can you spell McCarthyism? We're back to red baiting now, it seems, along with race baiting and every other kind of baiting. If you're wearing the mask, please note that it's now an occult symbol of your submission, whether you realize it or not. A spell has been cast on you and you're wearing the equivalent of a swastika armband, and people without it are being identified, and the government is encouraging that such people be ostracized and even attacked. I know some of you don't see it yet and may never see it. Most will never admit they were fooled, especially after being sanctimonious for 8 months and unfriending anyone who spoke up. If you've ever wondered what you'd do if the Nazis ever returned, well, now you know. Most have revealed themselves to be joiners, go-alongs, people who don't speak up. I don't know which form of behavior to despise the most. The people who've fallen for the psyops, who are at least sincere, or the people who see through it but do nothing because they're afraid of being ostracized. I know because I lead a group, and some people I've invited have written me privately to say they're too afraid to go public. They can't risk their jobs by possibly being seen in a news report about public demonstrations and rallies. Well, that attitude helped Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini and Franco greatly, I can tell you. Most Germans went along with what they got swept up in, not because they were passionate Nazis, but because they were living through a state terror campaign, and after a decade of that were led into a fatal and genocidal war. I'm a student of such history and see all the elements lining up. And you know what's weird? It's the same forces behind it as 100 years ago. The technocrats and eugenicists who sought to create a utopia based on creating a master race. Look at Elon Musk and his dreams of going to Mars and attaching our brains to computers. Look at the transhumanist agenda of people like the World Economic Forum's Klaus Schwab, an unreformed product of Nazi Germany himself. Last night, we not only fell down another step on democracy's stairway, but we fell down a whole flight of stairs. And almost no one in Canada noticed or will ever know because the corporate media won't tell them and they won't find their way to this post. The Stalinist purges are underway, folks, and things are only getting started. Ontario has announced ID 2020, and last weekend, the global reset of financial markets got underway in a vast and dangerous experiment to shift to a new system that may or may not prolong the casino economy of international credit a little longer. The bankers are picking up pennies in front of a steamroller at the moment, and when they get flattened, we'll move from a flat monetary system to a digital currency and the full artificial intelligence control grid. At that point, when the trap shuts and our lives truly become like an episode of Black Mirror, the significance of last night's events will register with you. I thought long and hard before I decided to share this with you. I take a lot of heat, as you probably know, for the stance that I've taken through this whole thing. I get hate mail, death threats. It's a very unpleasant path I've chosen for myself in many ways. Pleasant in some ways because I really think I'm doing the right thing. I think somebody has to stand up and say something is terribly wrong here. We have to do something about it. And I thought, well, this is really going to an extreme. And then I read it 4 or 5 times and I realized there's nothing extreme about it. It's the truth. And I'm just tired of dancing around and trying to make people happy and not offend anybody. I mean, I've never been that interested in it to begin with, but I guess I've abandoned all caution and just basically said, I'm going to report what there is to report. I'll make sure that it's accurate. I don't report things without checking them out. If it makes people angry, I'm sorry. If it makes people unsubscribe, I'm sorry. If it makes people hate me, I don't care. Because at the end of the day, if we all don't start caring about the right things, which is not people pleasing, the right things are doing what's right to restore our society to the way that it was before these criminals took control of it, well, there just isn't going to be much to talk about, is there? And probably you won't be able to watch this or anything like it, not even on a private channel like this. So my friends, I think this is a wake-up call. I've been sounding the wake-up call for a number of months. And I think it's more important now than ever before because we've really had a chance to see that they can get worse. They've been getting worse. Things have been getting worse in a lot of ways. And so it really is time for everybody to get together, realize what's going on, do something about it, and stop worrying what people think about you. You can get over it. Believe me, I have. And if we all stand up together, we have a chance to really overcome this. For ourselves, for our future generations, for the rest of the world. And we can't any longer wait for somebody else to do it for us. We have to all be engaged. So I'm asking you to join me. I've been asking since July, actually. Join MakeAmericans.freeagain.com. More lawsuits, more actions, more protesting, more lawsuits, and then more lawsuits, and then more lawsuits, and then more pressure on the government, and then more lawsuits. That's the only thing that's going to give us our lives back. And at some point in time, perhaps even a just flat refusal to go along anymore. That could happen, you know, 25, 30 million, 100 million people just say, that's it. I'm not doing it anymore. And how many people are hiding out there not wanting to be the only person. And if they would speak up and everybody spoke up at the same time, they would find out there are millions of us, because I think that there really are. So food for thought. And once again, the forbidden news. Now you know why I couldn't say this on YouTube, right? I'm sure that my whole channel would be taken down. And we'll hope that private channels can continue to tell the truth, because once they take those away from us, well, we really are finished, aren't we? MakeAmericansFreeAgain.com. Register, become part of our movement. We have to take our lives back, our country back. We have to take our government back. We have to take our world back. Thank you for watching.
So we're going to finish up here, and I'm going to end with a few quotes, and this is from John O'Donohue. We are sent into the world to live to the full everything that awakens within us and everything that comes toward us. The shape of each soul is different. There is a secret destiny for each person. We need to feel the dream with the wonder of a child approaching a threshold of discovery. When we rediscover our childlike nature, we enter into a world of gentle possibility. Consequently, we will find ourselves more frequently at that place, at the place of ease, delight, and celebration. The false burdens fall away. We come into rhythm with ourselves. Our clay shape gradually learns to walk beautifully on this magnificent earth. So I would ask that for my side, you get brave, because in truth, in reality, you are not a walking disease, but you are a creator, and you can own that. So thank you for watching this webinar, for taking the time to take that step and look into what's really going on and what you and what all of us can do. Please feel free to share this with whoever you think would benefit from watching it. And view my other webinars, the Part 1 Investigating the Science, and Know Your Rights and Tools to Protect Them. Take this actionable knowledge, embody it, use it to your benefit, to empower you. And if it does that, then I am glad. Thank you, and good night.